The diner stood at the edge of the city, its lights flickering against the endless dark sky. Most of the streets were empty. Only the glowing signs of alien bars and small shops burned in the distance. Inside the diner, soft music played, the air filled with the smell of hot oil and spice. Alien customers sat at tables laughing, talking, and sipping drinks that shimmered like liquid stars. Behind the counter stood Lyra, the alien waitress. She had long silver skin that reflected the neon lights and bright eyes that glowed faint blue. Her shift was almost over and she was tired. She cleaned the counter with slow hands, wishing for one quiet night with no trouble. Humans sometimes came here, but they were weak, clumsy, and always looked out of place. She had seen them struggle with strong drinks, cough at spicy food, and leave early with red faces. To her, humans were fragile creatures. Nothing more. The door opened with a soft ring. The cold wind from outside rushed in, and with it came a human man. He walked with steady steps, not too fast, not too slow. He wore a simple jacket, dusty from travel, and his eyes scanned the diner calmly. Some alien customers turned and laughed quietly. One of them whispered, "Another human, probably here to fail like the rest." Lyra rolled her eyes, already expecting extra work. She picked up her notepad and walked to the table where the man sat. "Welcome," she said in her usual flat voice. The human looked up, his eyes sharp, a strange mix of calm and challenge in them. "Thanks," he replied simply. His voice was low but carried weight. Something in the way he sat made him different. He didn't look nervous like other humans she had seen. Instead, he seemed too relaxed, as if he belonged there. "What will you order?" Lyra asked, tapping her notepad. The human smiled, not wide but enough to show confidence. "I'll take the challenge dish," he said. The diner went silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths, and all eyes turned to him. The challenge dish was a monster on the menu. Spices so hot that alien warriors used it to prove their strength. Meat so heavy that even giant species often failed to finish it once. No human had ever ordered it and survived without collapsing. Lyra blinked, her eyes glowing brighter in shock. "Are you sure?" she asked slowly. The man only nodded. "Yes, bring it." From the kitchen, the cook barked out a laugh. Another alien customer shouted, "He won't make it past the first bite." The whole diner filled with whispers and mocking laughter. Everyone waited for the human to change his mind, but he didn't. He only sat calmly, his hands folded on the table. As Lyra walked back to the counter, she felt her hands trembling. Why did this human look so sure? Why did his eyes not carry fear? She placed the order, and the cook began preparing the dish with extra fire and spice. The sound of sizzling filled the air, and the smell was strong enough to make weaker aliens cough. Lyra returned to the human with a glass of water. "You can still change your order," she said. Her voice softer now, but the human shook his head. "No, I came here for this." His words were simple, yet they carried a strange power. Lyra stared at him for a moment before looking away. She told herself not to care, but her heart beat faster. Something about him felt dangerous. Something told her this night would not be normal. Finally, the dish arrived, a massive plate glowing with red spice, smoke rising like fire. The aliens in the diner leaned forward, waiting for the show. The human pulled the plate closer, picked up the fork, and took the first bite. Everyone held their breath. The spice hit like a storm, the meat heavy like stone, but the human chewed slowly, calmly, and swallowed without a single flinch. Gasps filled the diner. "Impossible," someone whispered. "He didn't even cough," another muttered. Lyra's eyes widened, her hands frozen at her sides. She could not believe what she had just seen. The human lifted another bite, then another. His face stayed calm, his eyes steady, one by one. He ate the food, piece after piece. The plate began to empty, and the whispers in the diner grew louder. Aliens leaned closer, their eyes wide with disbelief. Some shook their heads, others muttered that it had to be a trick. But it was no trick. The human was finishing the dish. The impossible was happening right in front of their eyes. Lyra felt her knees grow weak. She gripped the counter for support, her breath shallow. When the human placed his fork down, the plate was clean. The diner fell into dead silence. Every pair of eyes locked on him. Then, with a calm voice, the human looked up at Lyra and said, "That was good. Bring me another." The diner exploded with noise. Gasps, shouts, and even laughter filled the air. Lyra's heart jumped, her hands shook. This was beyond madness. No alien had ever asked for another plate. Yet this human did it with a calm smile. At that moment, Lyra knew this night had only just begun. The diner had never been so quiet. Every alien eye was locked on the human who had just cleaned the impossible plate. The challenge dish was not a simple meal. It was fire and weight combined, created to break even the strongest stomachs. Yet the man sat calmly, as if he had eaten nothing more than a light snack. And now, with steady eyes, he had asked for another. Lyra stood frozen, her notepad clutched in her shaking hands. She could not believe her own ears. Another? She whispered, her voice almost lost in the noise of shocked aliens. Yes, the human repeated, calm, certain, not proud, not loud, but with a quiet force that silenced laughter. The cook in the kitchen laughed harshly. He's mad. No human can handle this. Even beast soldiers fall after one, but still. The cook began preparing a second plate, muttering curses under his breath. The sound of knives cutting, pans hissing, and spices burning filled the diner. The smell grew hotter, sharper, burning the nose and throat of anyone nearby. Some aliens coughed and waved the air with their hands, but the human didn't move. He only sat there waiting, his fingers tapping softly on the wooden table. The waitress could not take her eyes off him. She had served warriors, travelers, smugglers, and thieves, but never had she seen someone like him. Most humans avoided the challenge. Those who tried usually failed. Some fainted, some begged for water, some ran to the street sick and humiliated. But this one had not even blinked, and now he was ready to face it again. The alien customers whispered among themselves. He will die this time, one muttered. No body can take it twice. His insides will burn, said another. Others leaned forward with hungry eyes, wanting to see the moment the human broke. For them, this was entertainment, a cruel kind of sport, but for Lyra, something about it felt different, felt dangerous. She couldn't explain why her chest felt tight, why she was afraid for reasons she didn't understand. The second plate arrived, larger, hotter, smoke rising in thick curls. The cook slammed it on the counter with a grin. This will end him, he said proudly. The dish glowed red, the sauce bubbling, the spice sharp enough to sting the eyes from across the room. Lyra's hands shook as she carried it to the human's table. She placed it in front of him and stepped back quickly, afraid of what she might see. The human looked at the plate for a moment, then at Lyra. Thank you, he said politely. The words were simple, but they stunned her. No one had ever thanked her before eating this cursed dish. Then he picked up the fork, and without hesitation took the first bite. The diner gasped, every head turned. Everybody leaned closer. The human chewed slowly, calmly, swallowed without flinching. The fire spread across his face, but he did not cough, he did not break. He lifted another bite, then another, steady as a machine. Each mouthful was a challenge to death itself. But he never stopped. Lyra felt her throat dry, her hands gripping the tray so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to speak, to warn him, to stop him, but the words never came. Instead, she watched in silence. Trapped by the mystery before her, each bite was a strike against what everyone believed about humans. And with every swallow, the diner's silence grew heavier. A tall alien warrior at the back growled, "This is wrong, no human should do this." Others nodded. Their faces tense, it was no longer just surprise, it was fear. They had seen humans as weak, soft, breakable, but tonight, one human was rewriting the rules right before their eyes. Sweat formed on his brow, but his eyes never left the plate. He ate until half was gone, then paused only to sip the water Lyra had brought. Not in desperation, not in pain, only as if refreshing himself before continuing. The silence was so deep that every sound of fork against plate echoed like thunder. Lyra whispered under her breath, "Why are you doing this?" She didn't realize she had spoken until he looked up at her. His calm eyes met hers and he said, "Because limits are just walls waiting to be broken." Then he returned to his plate. Eating again, her breath caught and she stepped back. Her knees weak, bite after bite, he pushed forward, until the impossible second plate was nearly gone. Aliens muttered in disbelief, some angry, some afraid. The cook's smile faded into a scowl, his hands shaking as he realized what was happening. No one dared laugh anymore, no one called him weak. The diner was filled with nothing but fear and awe. Finally, the human placed his fork down on the clean plate. He exhaled softly, wiped his mouth with the napkin, and leaned back in his chair. The room stayed frozen, no one daring to speak. Then slowly, he turned his head toward Lyra and said with the same calm voice, "That was good." The silence shattered into chaos. Some aliens shouted, some slammed fists on tables. Some whispered prayers. Lyra's chest pounded, her glowing eyes wide, her body trembling. She had never seen anything like this. And she knew, deep in her heart, the night was far from over. The diner had turned into a storm of whispers and gasps. Every alien eye burned with disbelief. Watching the human lean back in his chair after finishing the second plate, the impossible had already happened once. And now it had happened again. But no one was ready for what came next. Lyra's hands trembled as she picked up the empty dish. She felt as if she were touching something unreal, something forbidden. Her heart raced in her chest, and her throat felt dry. She wanted to ask him how he was still alive, how his body had not collapsed under the fire and weight of the food, but his calm smile silenced her words before they left her mouth. The alien customers muttered in low voices. "This cannot be real," one whispered. "He should be on the ground," another hissed. Some leaned closer, their eyes sharp with suspicion. Others pushed back in fear, as if being near him was dangerous. The cook stood in the kitchen doorway, his face pale. For years he had watched warriors fall, soldiers faint and beasts retreat, but tonight, a human had made a mockery of the challenge, and then, the shock deepened. The human straightened in his seat and tapped the table lightly with his hand. "Another," he said, his voice steady and calm. The diner froze. The air itself seemed to stop moving. Even the lights flickered as if reacting to his words. Lyra's mouth opened, but no sound came. She stared at him with wide, glowing eyes. Unsure if she had heard him correctly. Another plate? No being had ever dared to ask for a third. It was beyond foolish, it was impossible. The cook shouted from the kitchen, "This is madness! He'll burn from the inside." But the human only looked at Lyra and repeated, "Another." There was no pride in his tone, no arrogance, only certainty. As if he already knew he would endure. Lyra's knees grew weak, and she gripped the counter for support. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear nothing else. She wanted to scream at him, to beg him to stop before it killed him, but something in his eyes held her silent. A quiet force that told her he was not like the others, that maybe he really could do the impossible again. The other aliens broke into chaos. Some shouted for him to stop, calling him insane. Others demanded the cook bring the dish, wanting to see him fall. A group of warriors at the corner table leaned forward, their eyes burning with both respect and fear. One of them muttered, "If humans can do this, then we know nothing of their kind." The words spread quickly, making the room even more tense. The cook hesitated, but under the pressure of the crowd, he began to prepare another plate. His hands shook as he added spice. More than ever before, the smell grew heavier, so strong it burned the eyes and throat of everyone in the diner. Some customers covered their faces, others coughed. But still the human sat silently, waiting. His calmness was more terrifying than the dish itself. When the plate arrived, glowing red-hot, smoke rising in angry curls, the room held its breath. Lyra carried it carefully, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped it. She placed it in front of him and stepped back quickly, her chest tight with fear. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't do this." But he only gave her a small smile and picked up the fork. Then, without hesitation, he took the first bite. The shock hit the diner like a wave. Aliens gasped. Chairs scraped the floor as some stood, unable to believe their eyes. The human chewed slowly, calmly, and swallowed. The spice lit his face red, sweat shone on his skin, but his eyes never wavered. He took another bite, then another, steady as a machine. The sound of his fork against the plate was louder than the whispers, louder than the beating hearts in the room. Lyra pressed a hand against her chest, her breathing shallow. Each bite he took pulled her deeper into something she couldn't explain. It was terrifying, but it was also powerful. This human wasn't just eating food, he was proving something the galaxy had never seen before. Halfway through the plate, the whispers turned into silence. No one dared speak. No one dared move. Every alien eye followed the human's fork. Every breath held until he swallowed. Even the cook, his face pale with sweat, stood frozen in the kitchen doorway. The man was breaking every rule of nature, every limit known. Finally, the plate was clean. The human leaned back in his chair again, exhaling softly. He wiped his mouth with the napkin and lifted his eyes to meet Lyra's. She felt her body lock in place under his calm gaze. Her knees almost gave out, her heart trembling like a trapped bird. The silence broke when someone at the back whispered, He did it again." The words spread like fire, repeated by voices all around. He did it again. He did it again. Until the entire diner shook with disbelief. Lyra dropped her tray, the sound ringing through the diner. She stumbled back, her legs weak, and whispered to herself, "This is not possible. No human can survive this," but deep down she already knew. This human was not ordinary, and tonight, he had just changed everything. The diner no longer felt like a diner. It felt like a battlefield, a place where something ancient and terrifying was unfolding. The smell of spice still hung in the air like smoke after fire. Every alien sat stiff, their glowing eyes wide, their breaths shallow, and in the center of it all the human sat calmly, his plate empty, his body upright. Lyra's heart hammered so loudly she could hear nothing else. Her hands trembled as she clutched the counter. She could not believe what she had just seen. 3 plates. 3 plates of a dish that had dropped warriors. Beasts and champions, gone, and still the human did not fall. Still he did not faint, instead he sat there steady, as if daring the universe to challenge him again. Then it happened. Her knees buckled. The tray slipped from her shaking hands and crashed to the floor with a sharp clang. Gasps filled the diner as Lyra stumbled backward. Her chest tight, her breath stolen, her vision blurred, and for a moment she thought she would collapse completely. Her body refused to move, her legs weak like paper. She had never fainted in her life, but tonight, her strength was gone. Strong alien hands caught her before she fell fully. "Easy," one customer muttered, but his eyes never left the human. Even while helping her, his gaze was glued to the man who had broken the impossible. The human stood then, slowly rising from his chair. The movement was simple, but it sent a shock through the room. He did not sway, he did not stumble. Instead, he stood taller than before, as if the challenge had only made him stronger. His shadow stretched across the diner floor, long and heavy under the flickering lights. This is not natural," the cook stammered. His voice cracked, his hands shaking with fear. He had created that dish to break the proud. Now he watched his own weapon fail, and it terrified him. Aliens began to argue among themselves. "He's a monster." One shouted, "No, he's proof that humans are not weak." Another barked back, some pressed closer to the door. Ready to flee, others leaned in, desperate to understand what they were seeing. Fear and awe mixed in the air. The diner was no longer a place of food, but a stage for something greater. Lyra forced herself upright, still trembling, her glowing eyes wide. She could not look away from the human. Her voice shook as she whispered, Why are you still standing?" The man turned his head toward her, calm as always. His reply was quiet, but it cut through the air like a blade. "Because I refuse to fall." The words made her chest tighten, not because they were loud, but because they were true. There was no weakness in his tone, no doubt in his eyes. He believed it fully, and somehow his belief made it real. The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Then one of the alien warriors slammed his fist on the table. "If this human can endure what none of us can, then what else are they hiding?" The room filled with shouts again. Fear, anger, suspicion, every emotion boiled over. But in the center, the human stayed calm, steady, silent. Finally, Lyra stepped forward, her legs still shaking. She had never felt so small, so powerless, yet she needed to ask, needed to understand. Why push so far? What do you gain from this? Her voice broke at the end, filled with desperation. The man's eyes softened for a moment as he looked at her. "To remind you," he said, "that humans are more than you think." Then he turned his gaze to the crowd. Not with pride, not with arrogance, only quiet certainty. And the weight of his words hung heavy over every alien present. Lyra felt her breath catch, her body still weak, her knees ready to give out again. But this time, it was not the spice or the shock. It was the truth she felt in his presence. For the first time, she saw humanity not as fragile, not as weak, but as something dangerous, something unbreakable. Her knees bent again, and this time she let herself fall to the floor. Not fainting, not unconscious, just overwhelmed. Her hands pressed against the ground, her chest heaving, and she whispered so softly only she could hear, "This human is not like the others. He is something else." The diner was silent once more. Every alien frozen in awe or fear. The human remained standing, calm and unshaken, and Lyra knew, with a certainty that made her tremble, that this was not the end. It was only the beginning of a story no one would forget. The diner smelled of smoke and spice, the air heavy like a storm that refused to pass. Chairs were pushed back, cups left untouched. and no one dared to laugh anymore. The human stood steady, calm, his eyes sharp, his body strong. Despite what should have broken him 3 times over, he had done what no alien warrior, soldier, or beast had done, and now the silence carried fear. Lyra sat on the floor, her breath unsteady, her glowing eyes wide. Her hands trembled as she looked up at the man. He had not collapsed, he had not begged for mercy. Instead, he looked stronger, as if the challenge had fed his spirit instead of burning it. And that frightened her more than anything. The cook finally broke the silence, stepping forward with shaking hands. "I made that dish for warriors," he said, his voice rough. It was designed to test strength, endurance, and pride. No one should eat it twice, let alone 3 times. His words were not meant for the human, but for everyone else, as if he was trying to explain away the impossible. But the crowd did not look at the cook. They only looked at the human. Questions burned in their eyes, fearful, desperate questions. What are humans really? How can one body take so much? What power hides inside them? One alien whispered, "Maybe he's not human at all." Another hissed back, "No, he is." And that makes it worse. The room buzzed with rumors, theories, fears, every voice low, as if speaking too loudly might draw the man's gaze. Lyra forced herself up on shaky legs, her knees still weak but her heart stronger now. She walked closer to the human, her voice soft but clear. "You knew you could do it, didn't you?" Her question silenced the whispers, every ear turning to hear his answer. The man tilted his head, his calm smile still there. "I knew I had to try," he said. His voice was steady, but his words carried weight. "Humans don't stop because something is hard. We stop when it's done." The phrase echoed in Lyra's mind like thunder. Simple, but filled with a truth she could not deny. She had spent her life believing humans were fragile, weak, but this one had shattered that belief in a single night. The cook shook his head, his voice breaking. "Even if you endured it, your body should not survive." The human turned his eyes toward him, calm, unshaken. "Humans adapt," he said. "And when we adapt, we endure more than anyone expects." The words spread through the diner like fire. Aliens shifted uneasily, their faces tight with unease. Stories of humans had always floated through the galaxy, strange tales of survival, of stubbornness, of impossible victories, but most brushed them off as myths. Exaggerations told by travelers now in this small diner. The truth stood in front of them, undeniable. Lyra's chest tightened as realization hit her. She had not just witnessed a man eat food. She had witnessed a message, a warning, maybe even a promise. This human was proof that her people, and perhaps the galaxy itself, had underestimated an entire species. One alien warrior finally stood, his heavy boots echoing on the floor. He looked at the human with a mix of respect and unease. "If one of you can do this," he said slowly, "what will happen when many of you rise together?" The question silenced the diner again. No one dared answer, but the thought hung heavy. If one human could endure what should have killed him, what could an army of humans do? What could a world of them achieve? Lyra swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "What are you, really?" she asked. The human looked at her, his calm gaze holding no arrogance. No cruelty, just quiet truth. "We're human," he said. "And that is enough." The simple word struck her harder than any shout. She felt her legs weaken again, but this time not from fear. It was from the heavy truth that pressed into her chest. She realized then that this night would spread far beyond the diner walls. The story of the human who defied the impossible would reach every ear. And with it, the galaxy would begin to fear or respect, the kind they had mocked for so long. The cook stepped back, his face pale, his pride shattered. The warrior sat down again, silent now, and Lyra, she stood frozen, staring at the man who had turned her world upside down. The human reached for his jacket. Calm as ever, as he stood to leave, the room held its breath. But before walking out, he paused, looked back at her one last time and said, "Remember this." Then he walked out into the night, leaving the diner in silence. Lyra's chest rose and fell quickly, her glowing eyes following the door long after it closed. She whispered to herself, barely loud enough for anyone to hear, "This is only the beginning." The diner's door closed softly behind the human, yet the silence he left behind was louder than thunder. Every alien sat frozen, staring at the empty chair, staring at the plates that once held the impossible meal. The smell of spice and smoke still clung to the air, sharp and heavy, but what truly lingered was fear. Lyra stood still, her glowing eyes locked on the door. Her chest rose and fell quickly. Her hands trembling at her sides, she tried to steady her breath. But the memory of his calm gaze would not leave her. The human had walked out as if nothing had happened, but his presence still filled the diner like a shadow. The cook leaned against the counter, pale and sweating. His pride as the master of the challenge dish lay broken on the floor. He shouldn't be alive, he whispered. Almost to himself, no stomach can endure that. No body should resist the fire 3 times over. But his words carried no strength. Only fear at the back, the alien warriors whispered in their deep voices. If one of them can do this, said the largest, his tusks glinting under the neon lights. What happens when many arrive? The thought made the others shift uneasily in their seats. They had mocked humans before, laughed at their weakness. But tonight had torn away that lie. One alien slammed his fist on the table, his voice sharp. This is dangerous. If humans are hiding such power, they cannot be trusted. Another shook his head quickly. No. Maybe he's the only one, maybe the rest are still weak. But the warrior at the corner growled low. You saw his eyes? That was no trick. That was truth. The whispers spread like fire. Suspicion, fear, and anger grew with every word. Some wanted to dismiss what they had seen. Others wanted to spread the story across the city. But all of them carried one thought in their hearts. Humans were not what they seemed. Lyra pressed her hand against her chest, trying to steady her racing heart. She remembered his words. Humans don't stop because something is hard. We stop when it's done. Simple words, yet they rang louder than any warning siren. She had seen his strength with her own eyes. And deep down she knew this was not just about food. This was about survival, about willpower, about something that made humans dangerous in ways no one had ever understood. The cook shouted suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. We must not speak of this night. If word spreads, others will panic, but already, some aliens had rushed out of the diner, eager to carry the tale. The streets would soon whisper of the human who defied the impossible. And from whispers would come stories. From stories would come fear. Fear that would spread faster than fire. Lyra leaned against the counter. Her knees still weak, her voice was soft, but steady when she spoke. You can't stop it. Everyone saw. Everyone knows. This will not be forgotten. The cook's eyes narrowed, anger flashing. Then the galaxy will tremble for nothing. It was only one man. But even he didn't believe his own words. The truth was already clear. One man was enough to change everything. The warrior at the corner stood slowly, his large frame casting a long shadow across the diner floor. His voice was deep and heavy when he said, If one man can do this, imagine an army. Imagine a world full of them. The thought silenced everyone again. Even the cook stopped breathing for a moment, his anger fading into dread. Lyra's hands tightened on the counter. She felt fear, yes, but also something else. Something close to respect the human had not boasted, had not shouted, had not demanded anything. He had simply shown what he could do. And in that silence, he had spoken louder than any threat. The night grew colder outside, wind pressing against the diner's glass walls. Inside, no one touched their food anymore. No one laughed. They sat with stiff shoulders and wide eyes. The image of the human's calm smile burning in their minds. The city outside carried on. But for those inside the diner, the world had changed. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, whispering to herself. He wasn't here to fight, but still he made them afraid. Her chest tightened as she thought of his words again. We're human, and that is enough. She didn't know why those words haunted her so much, but she knew she would never forget them. The cook finally sighed, wiping his forehead with his shaking hand. We must pray he never returns, he muttered. But even as he said it, the door's faint bell echoed in his ears. As if daring him to imagine the sound of it opening again, Lyra turned to the door once more. Her glowing eyes soft but full of something new. Fear still lived in her heart, but now it mixed with curiosity. What else could humans do? What else had they hidden from the galaxy? The night moved on, but the fear remained. And as the story spread beyond the diner, from voice to voice, street to street, one thing became certain. The galaxy would never see humans the same way again. The night passed, but the diner never returned to normal. The laughter that once filled its walls was gone. Replaced by whispers and long stares, the chairs sat empty, the food cold. Yet the air remained heavy as if the human shadow still lingered inside. Lyra sat alone at a corner table long after her shift ended. Her glowing eyes stared at the plates stacked in the sink. The floor marked by her fallen tray, but her mind was far away, replaying every moment of what she had seen. The human's calm eyes, his steady voice, his refusal to fall. It was burned into her memory, a fire she could not put out. Outside, the city lights flickered, neon signs glowing against the dark sky, and already the whispers had begun. She could hear them even through the diner walls, aliens passing by, repeating the story in hushed voices. The human ate the impossible dish. 3 times, he never collapsed. He asked for more. By the time morning came, the story would spread across the district, across the city, and soon across the stars. The cook cleaned in silence, his face pale, his hands moving slowly. He refused to meet anyone's eyes for years. His challenge dish had been his pride, his proof of strength, but tonight it had been broken, shattered not by a warrior or a beast, but by a human. Every time he thought of the man's steady smile, his stomach twisted. He could not understand it, could not accept it, so he worked without words, as if scrubbing the memory away. The alien warriors who had sat at the back corner had left earlier, but their voices had carried a warning. If one human can do this, the galaxy has misjudged them. Those words had struck Lyra harder than she wanted to admit, because she knew they were true. She leaned back in her chair, whispering to herself, "I thought humans were weak, but maybe weakness was just a mask." Her breath caught as she remembered his last words before leaving. Remember this. Simple words, but they carried weight like mountains. They had not been a threat, yet they felt like one. Not because he wanted harm, but because he had shown truth. And truth was far more dangerous by dawn. The diner filled again, not with hungry customers, but with curious faces. Aliens came asking questions. Is it true? Did a human really finish it? Did you see it yourself? Tell us. Some wanted details, others wanted proof, but all carried the same look in their eyes. Fear mixed with awe. Lyra answered little, her voice quiet, her body tired. But her glowing eyes betrayed her. Everyone who looked at her knew the truth without words. Yes, it had happened. Yes, a human had done the impossible. And yes, nothing would ever be the same. By midday, the whispers had grown into stories. Stories into legends. Some said the human had eaten fire itself. Others claimed he had smiled while death tried to choke him. Every retelling made the man larger, stronger, more terrifying, and though the details twisted, one truth remained clear. A human had shown strength none believed possible. Lyra stood by the counter, staring at the door. She wondered if he would ever return, and part of her feared it, but part of her wished for it. She wanted to ask him why he had chosen this diner, why he had pushed himself so far. Was it pride? A message? Or just who humans truly were? She would never know unless she saw him again. The cook muttered as he passed by. This story will spread until the stars themselves shake. He said it with bitterness, but also with truth, because already, strangers were coming to see the place where it happened, to stand where the human had sat, to whisper his name though no one knew it. And Lyra knew deep in her heart that this memory would last. Not just for her, not just for the diner, but for the galaxy, because once, in a quiet corner of the city, a human had done the impossible, again and again. And in doing so, he had changed how they would all see humans forever. That night, when the diner was finally empty, Lyra stood alone by the window. She looked up at the sky, the stars glittering like cold fire. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the silence. "I'll never forget you," she whispered. For she knew that wherever he went, his story traveled with him. And no one, no warrior, no beast, no empire would ever laugh at humans the same way again. The memory of that night had already become legend, and legends once born never die.